All right. Well, welcome to Thursday Night Live. I am Brennan Barnard. I'm your host and the Director of College Counseling at the Derryfield School in Manchester, New Hampshire, and the College Admission Program Advisor at Making Caring Common at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And thanks for joining us here tonight for Thursday Night Live. You are unlikely to get a cameo by Alec Baldwin or anything, but we do have some great panelists for you tonight. I will introduce them in just a minute, but first, just a couple program notes. This is being sponsored by the Derryfield School and by the Character Collaborative, which we can talk about later if we get into that. We will be recording tonight, and we'll send it out to everybody who's registered, and you can feel free to share with others, and so others can benefit from the wisdom we will get tonight. We'll be using the chat function. This really depends on your good questions. We have some questions that people submitted beforehand, but please enter questions in the chat as we get rolling, and we will get to those after we ask initial few questions. So with that, I will introduce our panelists, and I'm going to read this because, and I did kind of cut these down because we have such a wealth of experience here tonight that we probably could have taken the whole hour just introducing them. And I'm going to read these in order that my executive producer printed them, which is my son. And that will be going on his college application next year, by the way, executive producer. First off, we have Mary Wagner. Mary is the Assistant Vice President for Enrollment Management and Executive Director of Admissions at the University of South Carolina. She is a 24-year veteran of college admissions work at institutions varying in size, mission, and institutional selectivity throughout the South. She is a frequent presenter at local, regional, and national conferences about matters related to college readiness, affordability, access, and demographic trends. Wagner also serves as the current president of the Association of Chief Admissions Officers at Public Universities, an organization representing deans and directors of admission from state flagship and land-grant institutions throughout the U.S. So welcome, Mary. Thank you. Next, we have Whitney Soule. Whitney Soule is the Senior Vice President and Dean of Admission and Student Aid at Bowdoin College. I don't know how these titles fit on your name tags. She has worked in college admission for almost 30 years now at Bates College, Connecticut College, and now at Bowdoin. And she also serves on the board of directors for the Enrollment Management Association and the Coalition for College, and is the co-founder of the Casco Conference. Welcome. And finally, we have Mark Hatch. Mark Hatch is the Vice President for Enrollment at Colorado College. And Mark began his admission career at Bates when he was a student tour guide. And get this fun fact, when he was a student tour guide at Bates in the summer of 1985, he led a group of high school juniors that included none other than Whitney Soule. And Whitney ultimately chose which college? Bates, yes. So obviously he did a good job. Mark also worked as a graduate intern in admissions at Harvard before moving west for his first independent high school job as a teacher, coach, and college counselor at the Harvard Westlake School, and then director of college counseling at Marlborough School for Girls. Mark moved back to the college side as the director of admission at Occidental College, and in 2001, he assumed his current position at Colorado College as vice president for enrollment. He is in his 10th year as a board member at the High Mountain Institute, a semester program for high school juniors in Leadville, Colorado, and he's also a foundation trustee for the Cloud Forest School in Monteverde, Costa Rica, and serves on the Enrollment and Marketing Committee of the Colorado Springs School and advisory board for the Mastery Transcript Consortium, and does not sleep. He spent 5 years on the board at the Common Application, including a term as the president of this organization. So welcome all. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I would love to just start with a question we've been starting with in all these webinars. It's the third now. And I'll start with you, Whitney, if that works. I'm working clockwise on my screen here. And the question is, there's a lot of myths and there's a lot of hype sometimes around college admission and the media and just parent groups and among students. And so we'd like to kind of focus on what is the truth in college admission. And so I'd love just to ask, what's one truth of college admission?
Yeah, I love the question. And for me, and in all the places that I've worked in, I think we're representative of many, many schools, is that the truth is this is about students, right? Colleges are about students. We work for students. We work to create environments that are supportive of students and create these really important learning environments. And we're distinct among ourselves, but that's the goal of all of us. And so when it comes to admission, the truth about admission is that admission officers are looking for students to bring into the applicant pool who will be a really good fit, and then choosing students from that applicant pool that are independently a really good fit for the school, but that in building a class, we're pulling together a collection of individuals who on their own are a good fit, but as a class are a really interesting combination of backgrounds and talents and interests and curiosities and life experiences that together create a really important experience in each class, and those classes compound on one another as you move through school. And I think that while we have, our schools are different sizes and we have different application models and we may ask different questions, at the end of the day, the truth is that we're all trying to build classes that are really great for our school and a group of students who will really thrive, be challenged and thrive in what our schools have to offer. I think that's been true all along.
That's great. Thank you. Mark, what do you got for us? One truth about college admission.
So I want to address maybe something similar to what Whitney said. There's a myth out there that college admissions decisions, that there often is no rhyme or reason that we make those decisions. I guess in crass terms, some people have called decisions at some colleges a crapshoot. And the truth is, there are real people, humans with a humane approach to this process. And while the college admissions process is far from perfect, yes, there are some flaws. There are real people with hearts and minds who are reading every word of every application and know that the deliberation process is not completely objective. There's some subjectivity that comes to that process, but there are real people sitting around a table reading these applications who care deeply about the students, who care deeply about the college, and they take painstaking time in reading these applications each and every week of every week of the reading season.
That's a great point. And it's one that I've been trying to kind of hit home with students lately, that especially with kind of the crisis, the health crisis we're in now and everything, that you know, these people who are in admission are working from home just like you. They're wearing masks to the grocery store. Yeah, there we go. Wearing masks to the grocery store. They're concerned about their loved ones. And they get it, right? They get that that everybody's going through this. So it's a great point. Thanks. Mary, one truth about admission.
Great, thanks. First, I just want to say thank you for having me, and I'm feel very flattered to be among such illustrious company, and I'm really flattered that you offered to have me on the panel. So thank you, and I hope everyone's doing well and staying safe. I think just probably a short way to kind of sum up what both Mark and Whitney said is most colleges are looking for reasons to admit, not to deny. And the formula for that may vary by institution to institution based on institutional priorities. And yes, there are people on the other side of the desk who are reading those applications. We're all trying to build the class with being able to provide access to as many students as possible in that evaluation.
That's a great point. Yep. Office of Admission, not denial, right?
That's right.
Okay, and then so one other question I want to ask, just general question, and then we'll get to the to some of the questions that are flowing in here. And Mark, maybe we'll start with you this time. And that question is, what is the role of character, of ethical character in college admission, as you see it?
That's a great question. Most colleges and universities are residential places. We believe in the living, learning paradigm. You're there 24/7. So we care deeply about the students who come to the college. We want students who will both benefit by the education we offer, but also contribute to our campus, our class, our community. And I think that's where character makes a real difference. Character is when a kid in the dorm is having a tough time and there's somebody else that drops whatever they're doing and they pick that kid up. They become the glue of the residence hall. Character is when someone is in the library and notices that people are working collaboratively and maybe there's a take-home test involved and they speak up and say, hey, we've got an honor code. This is the honor system here. And character can manifest itself in so many ways. So absolutely, when we look at these applications, we're looking at character among lots of other factors.
That's great. Thanks. Mary, do you want to touch on that? And maybe, how are some of the ways you're seeing, you're kind of looking for demonstration of character and applications and that kind of thing?
Well, at our institution at South Carolina, we have a Carolinian Creed, which it encompasses components of an honor code, but it also is a statement of our core values and what we believe in. And so among those things, in addition to, treating people with respect and not tolerating bigotry and being collaborative and engaging in behaviors that are supportive of those who are in our educational community, those are our minimum expectations. We put that out there that when you choose to be a part of this community, you're all in on that expectation that you're going to be ascribing to a lot of these tenets that we think are central to being a Carolinian. And so when we're reading applications, oftentimes we're looking for components of students being able to demonstrate that they are already doing this in their respective communities. And then much of our onboarding process and much of our messaging from the point of being admitted to walking in and sitting in class on that first day is about communicating, this is what it means to be a Carolinian at our institution. And so we don't expect that just because you sign off on that in the admissions application that that's the only time you're going to have to demonstrate that. But we assume that if you are agreeing to be a part of the Carolina community, that you're going to embrace those tenets and you're going to see that operating in your daily life and work at the university.
That's great. Thank you. Whitney?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's already been said. And I think it's important to remember that, our schools are not another dimension, right? We are in the world with everybody else, and our charge is to be educating students that are going to go out into the world and be part of the workforce and raising families and making decisions and leading and inventing and doing all of these things. And if there isn't character at the center of that, then we're not fully educating. And so Bowdoin is a school that was founded with the principle of the common good, which in its most basic form means that you're working for something bigger than yourself. That the more you do for yourself, the more you have to provide for what's around you. But the real core of that is awareness that this is not about you all the time, and that whatever you're experiencing is in relationship to what is happening around you, and that the experiences for people around you who are in the same situation may be entirely different in how they experience it and how they react to it. And what does that mean? And so there are a lot of ways, from an educational standpoint, that adds a lot to the classroom. It adds a lot to learning and how students grapple with information and big questions. And there are big problems out there that need to get solved, right? So we need to be getting students acclimated to how to work with different viewpoints and go toward problem solving rather than digging in and arguing. But in the admission part of that, what we're looking for is evidence that students already understand that they're in a relationship to other people and to other circumstances, and that their experiences are uniquely their own and important and personally informed, but that's true for every other person. And so there are a lot of ways for that to come through in an application. It could be in the very obvious way of how students choose their activities, but it can also be in how they respond to what's available to them and how they are experiencing their own environment, and how we see that in how other people talk about students, right? So character can come through. It doesn't have to be a student saying, I've done this for another person, or this is the activity. It can be how they describe an experience, and you can tell in the way they're talking about it that they recognize they're an element of something bigger, or a recommendation may refer to a student as, it could be as sort of nuanced as one sentence that says, you know, this is the student who always has the answer, but often holds back to make sure others get a chance to talk, right? That it doesn't have to be a decided way of proving empathy. It's a way of being. Sometimes students even don't recognize it in themselves, and other people do. And so for all of us, in whatever our application processes are and review processes, we may have different approaches to looking for that and accounting for it. But I think we're all expecting it and leaning on that in some way. This isn't just about academic achievement or extracurricular achievement. It's about human beings.
That's a great point. And then more important now than ever. Well, thank you all. So let's dive into some questions, and I think they'll kind of run the gamut. Some will have to do with kind of the current pandemic and the implications of that, and then some just larger questions. Could we start with this, and I see it here in a couple of the different questions, this issue of deferring of students next year, potentially who seniors this year who are enrolling in your schools and might want to defer, and some of your advice around that, or are you capping the number of deferrals? That's been a question, and then how that might impact this year's juniors, the following year's class, if a lot of students end up deferring. So that's a lot of questions. Does anybody want to start with that? Mary, do you want to start with that one on deferrals and kind of maybe what your policy is and what?
Yeah, I was really hoping you wouldn't have me go first. I think that's the $1 million question right now. I mean, everybody is just seeking certainty and assurances right now, and we are no different. That is exactly what I want. The most difficult part of our job in admissions is trying to predict the behavior of 17-year-olds in a good year. And now we have all of these other factors that are kind of coming into play. And so I know that, right now, much of the mood at our institution is, we're always an institution that's open to students who are committed to pursuing their educational path at the University of South Carolina, and that if it's no for now, it doesn't mean no forever, and that there are always alternate paths of admission to the university. So I anticipate that we'll probably get some questions about wanting to defer a year, and we've usually done that pretty effortlessly. All we ask is the student just pay their deposit and commit to their intent to be there the next year. And then we have some conditions on that. You're not supposed to be taking any other additional coursework, and we would reevaluate whether or not we would have you, if you want to be back in the mix for scholarships and things like that. And it's just that, there's so many things that are going on that are unusual this year. We're revisiting a lot of our policies with regard to how we defer scholarships, and we're going to try to be as flexible as we possibly can, and to ensure that people have access to coming to the university. So, I mean, I can't really give you a concrete answer right now because I don't know exactly what the fall is going to look like, other than to say that we're going to try to be as flexible as possible. And we're also looking at options that might involve a spring start if fall is not possible, or, and try to find ways to help students look at that as well.
Yeah, that's great. Whitney, do you want to add anything? I mean, I know I quoted you in a piece that I wrote for Forbes that I'm publishing tomorrow on this very issue. So I know you've thought a bit about it.
I think we all think about it all the time. You know, there's a couple things I would encourage families to think about, considering, you know, in relation to what we're thinking about, which is we don't want to burden the high school class of 2021 with all the effects of this pandemic, because we're letting the class of the college class of 2024 just defer, right? And be sitting there in the next year, which makes no room for the students who will graduate next year. So as an institution, we're certainly thinking about enrollment management in broad terms, right? That we're not intending to say no to students who want to defer, but we're trying to think about when can students come back, right? If they're going to take time off, how do we think about when they can come back? It may not be exactly the term that they want to come back, right? We may have to think about what would that look like, to make sure that that our campus community is in a stable state for how many students we have on campus, that we're not lurching around from too many students to not enough students, and that for the classes coming up behind, there is a reasonable opportunity for them to become part of Bowdoin too. The other thing is that for reasons I totally understand, I think it's really easy to be in this space of not having any information and not enjoying the remote learning experience that most students are having right now, which happened overnight, you know, no planning, nobody had time to prepare for that, teachers or students, and really don't want to have to continue doing that. And so the idea of, well, if that's what it's going to be, I'm going to stop out until it's back to normal. And I have two thoughts about that. One, coming back to normal is not going to be just when students are able to be back on campus. The impact of this pandemic and altered enrollment models, right, and how many students are actually there is going to have a tail for years. How much will depend on how a school is managing their enrollment size over time. But this virus is still here, and it is going to be here for some time. It is going to impact how we're able to safely deliver education. And so, well, I don't think anybody who was hoping for a traditional on-campus experience is really excited about the idea of a remote one. One thing I would say is that it couldn't be clunkier than it was for any school that had to turn on a dime and take an in-person experience to a remote overnight. When we think about what might happen next year, we have time to prepare for that, to do that as well as possible. And I would encourage students to keep in mind that the experience that will happen at colleges, even if it is remote where it wouldn't otherwise have been, is still a classroom of people that wanted to be in that school environment, with that faculty, with other classmates who chose that school's character and personality and programs, that your classroom, while it may be virtual, is still a unique one that you applied to be part of. And so part of what we're thinking about is how to remind students that this is really special. And while it's not what you thought it would be when you were thinking about applying to college last fall and going through this process, this is the experience that the world is happening. And if you think it's going to press pause, stop time, and then start time again when you're ready, and being ready means it's going to look like what you thought it was going to be before this happened, you've got years before you're going to start school. So, you know, there's a squad, like there's your class ready to start school in the fall. And our encouragement would be to think about, you're part of history, right? This is happening. This is what the world is experiencing. And our colleges have character and personality, and I said this in one of the early questions, you know, we're built around the student experience. That's what we're thinking about in all the scenarios that we're preparing for. And I would encourage students to think about, if you're ready to go to school, let's go to school, and let's start in the fall, unless there's really extenuating circumstances that would make that impossible. And trust that the school that you want to be part of is ready to do this as well as they possibly can and bring you together.
That's a great point. And I've been actually saying to some students, I mean, what if there's some kind of national disaster in the fall of 2021? Are you going to regret that you put it off for a year? And what's that look? What are you going to do in this year? And Mark, maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because, and maybe just the gap year in general, because I know Colorado College has the gap year research consortium. Or
Sure. Thanks, Brandon. I'll make it quick. I think my colleagues did cover this. Colorado College has been at the forefront of the gap year movement for more than a decade. In our incoming class that is we expect to arrive in August, we have 64 gap year students, and that's about 12% of our incoming class. 3 weeks ago, we already had 35 that were admitted and deposited for the fall of 2021. Interestingly enough, several of those students have called us and asked if they can come in the fall. Their internship, their school volunteer work, their civic service, or their gap year program in India has been canceled, where they think it's going to be canceled. So we're seeing movement the other way. I'm going to make a bold prediction. I'll bet that 64 number at Colorado College will climb above that. I'm not sure it will go, that's 12% of our class. Maybe it'll go to 15% of our class, but I live in a household with a college first year student who had her college experience interrupted. She can't wait to go back. And then I have a younger daughter who is a junior in high school, and she can't wait to go back to school. They don't want to sit around with their dad. I can tell you that right now. So yes, Brandon, we've had the Gap Year Research Consortium at Colorado College. We've been doing research on students who take gap years, the value for groundedness, for focus, for readiness for college. We look at GPAs. There are 10 schools that are in the consortium, and we're sharing a lot of good data. So I do think there'll be an uptick, but here's the final bold prediction. I think our early decision pools will be down next year. 75% of our early decision pools consists of students who visited the campus, and we had to shut out 1,000 visitors in the month of April. We're shutting out several hundred in May, and we're just about to cancel a portion of our visits in June. We're doing everything we can on campus to ensure, to the extent that we're in charge, that we're going to start on campus in residence for block 1 come August.
Well, so that begs the question, and it's a question that's here in the chat, and this could be for any of you. What do you foresee in terms of potential changes to early decision? And for those listening, early decision being the binding and early action, but early decision being the binding admission plan, where if you're admitted, you need to enroll. And I've heard a bunch of questions recently about whether or not some of those early action and early decision deadlines that are usually in October and early November will be pushed back, or will schools be getting rid of ED1 and just go with ED2 in January? Any thoughts on that?
I'll jump in very quickly and just say that it's too early to tell. We're working on a month-by-month calendar. If we can begin to recruit on campus, face-to-face, or off campus, and too much is unknown, I would expect that you would see some movement if by October we're still not being able to meet students, greet students on campus. Perhaps where there will be more flexibility is the early decision round 2. That's just my guess, the January.
Great, thanks. Well, let's get to another question. So, and this is a question you've probably heard a lot recently, and it's here a couple times in the chat, so I'm just going to ask it. But because of the pandemic, and because a lot of schools are moving to PassFail grades, and because of more schools becoming test optional, I know some of you are test optional already. What aspects of the application will you focus more on? Mary, do you want to start there? And yeah. Oop, I
just muted myself, sorry. what I kind of want to do like a follow on to some of Mark's comments, and then just kind of talk about how we're going to use some of these components in our evaluation process. But South Carolina has been trying to use a lot of technology and processes to reduce the amount of friction that students experience in the application process as it is. We've been using unofficial transcripts that students upload in order to do the initial evaluation, and not only having the official at the end of the year. A pass-fail grade, it's just that, it's pass or fail. There's no letter grade associated with it, and we know that these things are beyond the student's control, so we're going to evaluate them, and we're going to assume that the teachers at your schools are responsible for determining what's passing and what's failing, and that they will assign the appropriate grade. For a public institution, as the only public represented here, oftentimes we're trying to adhere to what our state standards are, and they may be prescribed curriculum, and they're looking for a certain number of Englishes and maths and sciences and things like that. And so we're going through to look to make sure that you've got that curriculum when doing those initial evaluations. But then we're also looking at, how well you're doing in the classes. Have you taken a rigorous course load? So your curriculum, your senior schedule, are you continuing to challenge yourself, things like that, as well as, how well you've done in classes that you do have grades in. But I think every single, any college person who's telling you that they're not going to consider the unique circumstances of this year and next year's evaluation is not being very realistic. I mean, we have to reevaluate and retool a lot of our processes based on this in order to try to give people the benefit of the doubt. So back to my earlier comment, we're looking for reasons to admit, not for reasons to deny. And we're trying to find people who look like they're a good fit for the institution, that are academically prepared, and that can come to the university ready to dig in and engage in the academic life of the university. So that's our primary component in terms of evaluating a lot of the academics. And then we're also looking for students who are able to demonstrate that, they've worked through adversity, or if they have been in challenging situations contextually, we want to look at those kinds of things and evaluate how well they're doing within their specific context. So those are all things that are going to be really, really important to us when we're looking at the application and making our decisions.
And where do you get some of that information about context? I mean, I think that's a lot of families wonder that about, what some of their family responsibilities might be, or
Right.
Some students are home right now trying to help a younger sibling learn at school, or taking care of a elderly parent or grandparent.
Yeah, and so, we're pretty overt about telling students, at least in our application process, that we take a pretty broad view of leadership, and it's not always about being the captain of, some athletic program, or being student body president, or, having some, defined leadership role in an organization, but that there's leadership that happens within your family, or in your community, or in your work life, or your volunteer life, your religious life, and things like that, that are also very relevant examples of how you interact with your peers and how you demonstrate leadership and contribute to the larger good of your community. So those kinds of things are important to us. But we also know that students may grow up in communities where they don't have access to a lot of the kinds of activities that highly resourced students may have. And so we're trying to look for students that are taking advantage of the things that are going on in their community. The University of South Carolina is a participant in the College Board's Landscape Project, and they use that tool, and that does help us kind of see how well the student is doing relative to their peers within that school over a 3-year average. So whether it be standardized tests, or what kinds of communities that they are living and working in, those things can be very, very useful for us, because we don't have a minimum cut score. Like a lot of times people will ask us, what's your minimum to get in? And it's like, well, I don't know. It depends, because we're looking at the whole student while we're trying to evaluate that. We want to see that the student has taken a challenging curriculum within their respective academic community. And we're going to be looking at the school profile to make those kinds of judgments, and kind of see what kinds of activities are available, what they've got going on in their lives, and how they're demonstrating leadership in that setting.
That's great. Thanks. Whitney, do you want to expand on that and maybe, you just muted, and talk a little bit also about this kind of idea of course rigor, and there was a question, maybe you could kind of put all this together. There's a question there about kind of what is test optional, and you know, does that mean students shouldn't submit tests if they have them? And then also this kind of issue of rigor of courses and how you look at that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, you know, following on what we were just talking about, adaptation is the name of the game. I was writing something for our communications office today, thinking about juniors and the students following behind them who are sophomores and freshmen in high school. And everything is about adaptation in the year coming up, right? So Mark was saying it's too soon to say what's going to happen with early decision, because we're going to have to adapt to what's happening as we roll into the admission season. The colleges are, so are the students, right? We don't know whether students will still be in pass-fail work in the fall in their high schools. We don't know, even if they're still graded in the high schools where they are now, we're, I think, all going to prepare to be pretty sensitive to understanding that finishing up this year was highly disruptive. So even if there are grades there and it's a student whose grades have been pretty consistent and they're not at the end of this year, we're going to want to understand sort of, I mean, the obvious is we're in a pandemic, right? And everybody had to transition to remote learning, but sort of what was that experience like, and what was driving the students' experience at the end of the year? And for students who have pass-fail grades now and maybe going into the fall, depending on what's going on, a lot of our colleges are experiencing pass-fail grades too, right? We're answering those same questions for our students who want to apply to graduate school. What's going to happen now, right? If I've got pass-fail grades on my Bowdoin College transcript. So all of this to say that so much of the anxiety about what's going to happen, I think the kind of reassurance I think we as deans can provide here is that we're all going to adapt to this. And what we can look at is, by the time students are applying to us, they have had choices in 9th, 10th, and 11th grade around the rigor that they want to take in their schools. And for all of us, I think I'm speaking for all of us, that your choices around rigor are relative to what your school provides. So we're not comparing the rigor choices from a student in this school to the choices that a student made in this school over here. Because, to use Bowdoin as an example, 9,400 applications from 4,500 different high schools. And those 4,500 different high schools have their own grading systems, weighting scales, methods for naming rigor and classes and who can get into them and all those things. So it's relative to your environment. And when you were talking about the landscape, I mean, that's a great tool for helping the application readers understand that. So rigor up to this point certainly is a signal to us around your disposition toward learning through high school. And the choices that a student makes for their classes in the senior year as they're coming through this year may follow that same path, or they may be adjusted by what the school is able to provide and manage in another environment in the fall, or based on what a student's able to manage based on what they're experiencing at home or in their own community that may disrupt their rigor choices, right? So everything is going to have to be understood in its context, and testing is the same. So Bowdoin actually was the first school to be test optional 51 years ago. It was 1969. And so Bowdoin's had a lot of practice in figuring out a way of doing academic assessment that doesn't require testing to be there for us to make a good prediction for how well someone will acclimate academically to Bowdoin. But we've always been asked, does that mean that my testing doesn't matter? And the answer is no. And I think this goes to the question that you were asking, Brennan, whether you should take them or not. Schools who are test optional, you have to trust that the school that is saying they're test optional, whether they have been for a long time, whether it's within the last couple of years, or whether it's in response to the pandemic and the lack of opportunity for testing, is that they are providing that option because they're going to stand behind it. And that if you have testing that you feel represents you well and is a good element to add, you should send it in. Whether or not even if it's not required, if you feel like it's valuable, you should send it. And if you feel like it's not, or you couldn't do it, you should feel confident that if a school is test optional, they're not expecting it from you, and that they can move through the process fairly without feeling a deficit for a piece of information that's missing. I would use as an example interviews. Bowdoin doesn't require interviews of students. It's optional. About 15% of our applicants had interviews. So we're not looking at 85% of the applicant pool going, well, why didn't you interview? Right? What's wrong with that? There's an interview missing here. And we feel the same way about testing. If an interview happened and we have the notes, it becomes part of how we think about the student. It adds in. If we don't have an interview, we are relying on what we require that we know matters, and it's there for everybody. So I think there has to be some trust. I know it's hard, but some trust on the part of the students and their families that if colleges are creating this policy, it's the college's responsibility to stand behind it and understand how they can manage their process with a piece of material that's not required.
That's great. Thanks. Mark, let's just to maybe switch gears here a little. One of the questions earlier in the chat was this idea about summer and what summer looks like for students. And I mean, yes, in this current situation, but also in general about as you look at applicants and what they choose to do in the summer, kind of what is some of your thinking around that? And, you know, especially this summer when they might not be able to do much if they were, you know, planning on being a camp counselor and no longer can do that, or work a job or volunteer. Any thoughts on the summer experience?
Sure, you can only do what you can do, and we're not expecting to have elaborate resumes with the play this spring or your soccer season this spring. We're not expecting internships. We're not expecting volunteer work. We're not expecting summer camp counselor. You know, I think there's an opportunity here for everyone. I've been doing this for 33 years on both sides of the desk as a college counselor at 2 independent schools in the 90s and as a college admission officer at 4 places. And we've got to slow down, focus on what you can control, read. Hopefully it's not binge watching Netflix all the time, but we're fully expecting that we're going to have applications that have spring and summer and possibly even fall without the traditional things that we see. So please don't stress about it. We're human and humane people that on this side of the desk will take what we can get and try to the best of our ability, get to know the students.
That's great. Thanks. There was a question earlier that I saw that is a little more macro about the college search. I'm just getting to it. It was kind of this idea of, without knowing exactly what a rising high school senior wants to pursue in college, what are the top 3 things they should be looking for or doing to narrow their search? So for the student who's just still questioning, I mean, it's one thing for maybe a student who feels pretty sure that they want to be an engineer and they've done some stuff around that and it's confirmed their interest in doing that. But for the student who's still kind of undecided, and you know, what are some good tips you have for how to, especially not being able to get on campuses, how to start to narrow their college search? Do you want to start with that one, Mark?
I work at a liberal arts college. I spent most of my career at liberal arts colleges. Our number 1 major coming in is I don't know. It's undecided. We demand that students spread out across the curriculum from arts and humanities to social sciences to natural sciences. So we deal with this every day. I don't think you should know what you want to be when you grow up, when you're 18. Studies show that you'll have not 1 career, but 7 or 8 jobs. And 3 or 4 of those jobs haven't even been named or invented at this point. So I guess I'm deeply skeptical in some ways. I think students need to be a little bit more malleable, a little bit more flexible, a little little bit more open-minded. I recognize that there's some anxiety that comes with that, but we want students to explore.
That's great. Mary, any thoughts on kind of tips for how students can start to narrow some of their choices and figure out what they're looking for in a school?
Yeah, well, to echo Mark's comments, not knowing what you want to do, oftentimes, one of the things we really tout at a large university like South Carolina is the large availability of majors in a lot of different disciplines. And so for those, I know for at least for me, when I chose to attend the University of South Carolina, I was very unsure of what I wanted to do, and having a lot of major options was something that provided at least me with a little bit of psychological security and knowing that I could always find something to do. But as far as institutional features or maybe kinds of programs that you want to look at, I'm always a little bit weary of advising, like, what are your friends doing? But your people in your immediate peer community, parents, your school counselor, you've got great resources with your school counselors as well, who oftentimes have visited a lot of different types of schools that you might not have heard of or have ever considered. And when they are visiting a lot of these schools to learn about these institutions, they're thinking about specific students that they think would be a good fit for these schools oftentimes. And so I would not be shy about asking other people who may have some experience in that area to give you some suggestions that might not be on your radar, and you could be pleasantly surprised. And then, of course, everyone's going to tell you that, all of these online resources have been beefed up for people to go and not spend money and still be able to talk to people at many of these institutions. You can sit in on virtual sessions or do virtual tours and things like that. It's a great way to kind of get a vibe, or follow social media for a lot of these institutions, and you can kind of get a sense for what their personalities are like.
Yeah, it's one of the real silver linings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Whitney, do you want to add some?
I just have one thing to add. I mean, I agree with all of this, and I think a lot about the escalating pressure that college-bound students seem to be under year over year, that it just feels more and more intense. And I think all of us in our roles are trying to think about how can we convey that this degree of anxiety doesn't actually translate into results, right? Like, how do we figure out how to draw this back? And it's been really, really tough to try to get that message out. But I think the conditions of this pandemic actually provide an opportunity to let the air out a little bit, right? I think that Mark's comment around, of course, there may not be summer opportunities that students are expecting, and may have to find themselves, reading books and like mowing the lawn and like doing things that are not seen as like necessarily productive time, but just useful time. And what I hope happens on the other side of this next application cycle, and maybe those that follow, is that we're still choosing really great kids for our schools, even when the bottom's been pulled out of the activities that they've been so committed to and the plans that they've had that they think they need to excel at for us to notice them, that we're still going to notice them, even if they can't be playing sports in the fall, and if the clubs that they lead can't meet, and if the job they were going to have over the summer doesn't happen, that we can still see who they are. And to the question around choosing a major, and I think that the point that was made around having a lot of options was sort of a security feeling, right, that you didn't have to know. It's something we actually really appreciate in admission, right, because our schools offer so much, and when you're reading about a student who is so sure about what that experience has to be like, that may be exactly the experience that they drive themselves through at our school, and it could be really successful. But we know that there's a lot more for them, and you're trying to find signals of, would they see it, would they notice, would they try something new. I was on a live stream last night with some Bowdoin students that we were doing for our admitted students, because tomorrow is the day that our students would decide whether or not they want to come for the class of 2024. And one of our students, who's a senior, was answering a question around, if you knew then what you knew now kind of thing that an admitted student asked. And her answer was, I came to Bowdoin 100% sure that I was going to be a chemistry major. I knew what I wanted to do with it. I was going to go on to graduate school. I chose my classes around that, and the distribution requirements sort of made her take courses in other areas. And she had friends, to your point, that were taking other classes that they were talking about and sounded really excited about, and professors that they were getting to know. And it made the idea of trying something feel accessible. And she's graduating as a kind of double major in computer science and education. And she said, you know, I never would have known I would have liked those things. And it turns out I love them. I love them. That's why I have 2 majors. And I wouldn't have known that because I knew what I wanted was a chemistry major. And which isn't that chemistry major isn't great. And that if you start college knowing what you want and you follow through on that, that you've missed out. But that idea that there's so much opportunity here and to allow students to just breathe, right? We're not doing the activities we want to do either. You know, like where you started this, Brennan, like all of us are experiencing an entirely different life right now.
What's the whole growth mindset, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Speaking of things that get students somewhat anxious in this process, this experience, would love to hear, and there are a number of questions here about the college essay. You know, some of the questions are, you know, should they not write about the COVID experience and so forth. I think some schools might be asking specific questions about their students' response to COVID, just so that they can respond there, but also have a college essay. But as just in general, as you, my feeling is that students don't need to stress as much as they do about a lot, but about the college essay, and it's more an opportunity for them to really to tell their story and to express kind of, it's a good exercise in kind of in identity development and in kind of expressing your narrative, and just thoughts on how to approach the essay, or what you look for, or what stands out in essays would be really great. Mark, do you want to touch on that?
Sure. Simply put, we're looking to get to know the student. It's another valuable voice in the file. It goes beyond the letters and the numbers. It's also, we're looking for that authenticity of voice. We want to know what matters to the student, how they spend their time, their perspective on different things. So it's just a good writing can be on any topic imaginable. And yes, we imagine we're going to get some COVID-19 essays next year. As long as we learn something about you that's not contained in the file elsewhere, as long as it is your authentic voice, we look forward to reading those essays.
That's great. Any other thoughts? Are we good on essays? Okay.
I just wanted to say I fully anticipate that we're going to see our share of the COVID-19 files and essays. And I think that that's totally fine, because this has been probably one of the most tumultuous things that's ever happened to any of us. And if you didn't have thoughts on it, or weren't taking some time to reflect on that now, I would start to wonder how human you actually are. Because I know I'm spending a lot of time trying to reflect on that too, and trying to reflect on that and alongside my peers that I don't get to see all the time, and the staff that I have, that we're all struggling with these things too. And we cannot wait to learn how the generation that we're serving is grappling with this, processing it, what they're learning from it, what they're giving up, what they're adding to their lives, what they're grateful for, things they hadn't seen. I know that a lot of us are not going to take for granted going out to dinner in a restaurant ever again after something like this. For example, that community that we have taken for granted, whether it's just, you know, sitting each other in the restaurant or even just walking past each other in the hallway. These are all the kinds of things that I know I'm reflecting on, and I know that students may want an opportunity to do that, and that the essay can be a really great opportunity to do that.
That's great. Thanks. Okay, so we are getting towards the end of the hour here, and I know you all are anxious to get back to watching enrollment deposits come in on the eve of on May 1st. I would love to just end with a question we've been ending with in all these webinars, and that is if you could each share, knowing what you know now about college admission, what would you do differently about your college search, or how would you advise a student to do something differently? And Whitney, having a different tour guide does not count. So who wants to give it a roll? Do you want to start, Whitney? What you would do differently?
What I would suggest students do differently?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's one really important thing. I mean, Mark touched on this earlier in the hour around the visitors that we don't have right now. And so, you know, for Bowdoin, that would have been 2,000 people over the course of sort of the mid-February school breaks all the way through the end of April, who would have been coming for tours and information sessions. And in order to do that, they would have been on our website and thought, oh, I want to go visit Bowdoin, and then they would have registered for a tour, which means they would have filled out their contact information, and then we would know about them. Students who were sitting for tests in the spring, when they signed up and to take the SAT or the ACT, might have opted in for schools to be able to search for them. And there are a lot of test dates that were canceled. Those dates may come back, but those students' names aren't out there right now. And for a lot of us, that's a great way of sourcing students who don't know about us yet. We would be visiting high schools and going to college fairs this spring, and students who didn't know about Bowdoin might be walking by the table and stop and ask some questions and fill out a form and sort of very passively become part of our mailing list. And I think that students right now, because we can't do this in-person stuff, may start their college search and do some online looking and browse Bowdoin's website, for instance, and sort of get stuck in some YouTube videos and looking at all these things. But that's not all there is to know about a college, because what we do in admission, I'm sure this is true for all of us, is when we know you're out there, however we got your name, when we know you're out there and where you are and what year you're graduating, when you might be thinking about applying, we start to deliver content about that very thing. That's how you're going to know when we're open for visitors again. That's how you're going to know when we're doing a live stream dedicated to being first-generation college student. That's how you're going to know these things are happening without having to remember to go back and look at all of our websites to see what's on the schedule. So my recommendation for what to do differently is there are a lot of passive ways you probably didn't realize students before were finding their ways into college mailing lists. And I would encourage you to get on mailing lists actively. If you're browsing a college site or someone recommends a college to you, don't leave that site if it's at all interesting to you without filling out the information form. If you don't like what you're getting later, unsubscribe. But give yourself the opportunity for schools to tell you what's going on, because it's different than what you see just by being on a website. And we want to make sure we get to you.
That's a great point. Thanks. Mark, what do you think? What would you have done differently?
Thank you, Whitney, for not singling out your tour guide. So, you know, this is a time for deep reflection. I hope students and parents and even college admissions officers are breathing and relaxing a little bit more. I've been doing this for 33 years, and things have gotten really, really crazy. So college is a time, students, where you're going to meet some of the best friends that hopefully you'll have for life. You get to choose your courses. You're going to have great faculty who become mentors. Some will want them to call you by their first name, and you'll keep in touch with them for years after college. You have all this unstructured time. Your parents aren't there. College is an amazing experience, and you can have that experience at any one of our 3 institutions or any one of 300 other institutions. So yes, it matters. But the stress and pressure that you put on yourselves, and maybe I'm speaking as a college parent right now, there's way too much busyness and craziness and anxiety surrounding college admissions. You're going to be fine. College is a blast.
Life is too short. That's right. Thank you. Mary.
Well, I would just say keep an open mind and don't assume that you only have to go with what's on the sweatshirt or what everyone else has already done. Be a little bit adventurous. Go ahead, ask to be put on some of those mailing lists. You know, there was a time in college admission, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, where we really got very upset about stealth applicants, and everyone was showing up in the pool just as an applicant, but we knew that they were always searching online or finding these other ways to do these things. And I think it's probably more important than ever that students raise their hand, be willing to be put on some mailing lists if they're not going to have the traditional paths where a lot of colleges are going to try to procure those lists. And then engage with the schools that sound interesting, and add a few that maybe you hadn't originally considered. You might pleasantly surprise yourself.
It's a great point and a great note to end on. So thank you all so much for being with us and for sharing your thoughts. And thank you to everyone who joined us watching, and hope you'll join us again next week. Next Thursday at the same time, we will have Jim Rollins, who at the University of Oregon, and Jeff Schiffman from Tulane University, and Peaches Valdez from Hamilton College. So look forward to having you back next week, and thank you all again.
Thank you so much.
Be well and stay well.
Thank you all.